You were in the middle of a normal conversation, a good morning text, a meme sent for no reason, a shared laugh about something small, and then nothing. Silence fell unannounced. No fight, no goodbye, no sign that it would be the last time. You waited. You reread the messages, trying to find where you went wrong. You found nothing. And that was, perhaps, the hardest part of all. There was nothing to resolve, just absence. There's a specific kind of pain that arises, not from a clear loss, but from a question that was never answered. The human mind was built to close cycles. When something remains open-ended, it works, sometimes obsessively, trying to fill the void with some explanation that makes sense. You've done this. Everyone does. And while you searched for answers, the other person had already moved on. But why? This is what few people truly stop to understand, because it's very easy to label someone who disappears as cowardly, immature, cold. These labels provide a temporary sense of control, but they don't explain anything, and the behavior of disappearing without explanation has much deeper roots than a lack of character. Think with me. There's a psychological mechanism that kicks in when someone anticipates a difficult conversation. The brain starts calculating the emotional cost, possible rejection, imagined conflict, the pain of seeing the other person suffer because of something you're causing. For some people, this cost seems unbearable, not because they don't care, but because they care too much about their own pain, and sometimes also about yours. Disappearing, in this case, isn't indifference. It's a twisted form of protection. Think of someone who grew up in an environment where conflicts were explosive, where an honest conversation ended in yelling, or emotional punishment, or weeks of heavy silence. For that person, ending something with words learned to mean risk. The body stores this, the mind puts this into practice, and in adulthood, when the moment comes to say, "I don't want this anymore," the threat system triggers, even if the actual situation is completely safe. Silence becomes an escape. Flight becomes survival. But there's the other side of the story. Some people disappear not out of fear of conflict, but due to a genuine inability to access what they feel and translate it into words. They don't know what to say because they don't yet know what they feel. Processing complex emotions in real time, while someone waits for an answer, can be paralyzing for those who have never developed this skill. Silence isn't coldness. It's a confusion that hasn't found an outlet. There's also that more subtle pattern. Someone who disappears because the connection became too intense, because the closeness started to activate something they don't know how to handle. Intimacy, for some people, isn't comforting, it's threatening. Not because the other person did something wrong, but because real intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, for those who learn that opening up hurts, turned into danger. So they disappear when things get too good. Is it cruel? It seems so, but is it conscious? Rarely. Most people who disappear don't wake up in the morning and decide to hurt someone. They wake up feeling something they can't name, make a short-term decision to alleviate immediate discomfort, and don't calculate the trail they leave behind. Not because they are bad people, but because they are, in some way, in emotional survival mode. And in that mode, their field of vision narrows. You disappear when you're trying not to drown. And here's where the pieces start to fit together. Think back to the opening scene, that normal conversation that turned into silence. What you didn't see was what was happening on the other side. Perhaps a person who felt that expectations of them were increasing and didn't know how to say it. Perhaps someone who had truly connected with you and panicked precisely because of that. Perhaps someone so disconnected from themselves that they simply had no words. Not because you didn't matter, sometimes precisely because you did. And you, on your end, spent weeks building a narrative about what you had done wrong, reviewing conversations, questioning your own perception of reality. This has a name, and it's not an exaggeration on your part. It's a real neurological response to ambiguous loss, the loss of something that was never officially closed. The brain doesn't know whether to grieve or to wait, and this suspension is exhausting. What hurts isn't just the person's absence, it's the absence of closure. It's not knowing what that was, what you were to them, what happened. Ambiguity is, in some contexts, more painful than a clear and difficult answer. Now, I need to say something you might not expect. You've also disappeared before. Not necessarily like this, perhaps not with this intensity, but there's been a time when you took too long to reply to someone's message who was waiting. When you avoided a conversation you knew needed to happen. When you distanced yourself from something or someone without much explanation. I'm not saying this to diminish what you felt. I'm saying it because it reveals something important. This behavior doesn't belong to a category of bad people. It belongs to the human experience. It appears where there is pain that hasn't found language, where there is fear that hasn't found courage, where there is need that hasn't found form. Most of us were poorly taught how to end things, how to say, "This isn't working for me," without feeling cruel, how to walk away with honesty. We were taught to avoid discomfort, and disappearing is, in the short term, the most efficient way to avoid it. The problem is that discomfort doesn't disappear, it just changes address. For those who disappear, there usually remains a low-level guilt that was never processed, a pattern that repeats in other relationships, and a growing difficulty in sustaining real connections. For those who are left, the question remains, and sometimes the silent belief that they didn't even deserve an explanation. That belief is a lie. Just to be clear, what happened to you says much more about the inner world of the person who disappeared than it does about your worth. This isn't a self-help platitude. It's basic behavioral psychology. People act based on the mechanisms they possess, and those who disappear, most of the time, don't have other mechanisms available at that moment. This doesn't make the behavior right. It makes it human. And understanding this, truly understanding it, not just intellectually accepting it, changes something. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't answer the question that lingered. But it removes the weight you carried as if the other's absence was evidence of something wrong with you. It wasn't about you. It was never about you. The silence that remained was a reflection of someone who hasn't yet learned to inhabit their own discomfort with honesty. And you, who waited for an explanation, who spent weeks rereading messages, who felt that specific pain of an unnamed loss, you did something they couldn't do. You stayed present, even when it hurt. That, in my view, says a lot about who you are. Not as a virtue that needs reward, but as a real capacity to be in the world with others, to feel, to care enough to want to understand. The world will continue to have people who disappear. That won't change overnight. What can change is what you do with the story you tell yourself afterward. You weren't abandoned because you weren't enough. You crossed paths with someone who hadn't yet come far enough within themselves. There's a huge difference between those two things, and it's worth knowing where you stand in this story. Leave a like and subscribe to keep following us, and leave your opinion on this in the comments below. It will be very valuable to us. Until next time.